government together in previous Senedd. So it may well be that despite Labour having been absolutely obliterated, I mean, you cannot overstate what a terrible, terrible, terrible result this has been for Welsh Labour. They may well be able to negotiate some deals here because they've got 9 MSs and that would get them over the line. Now, Reform, they have 34. I think they are by far the biggest opposition, an extraordinary result for a party that was basically nowhere in 2021 at the last Senedd election. Absolutely extraordinary result. They have said they will not oppose for opposition's sake. So it remains to be seen whether agreements can be made there. But certainly I think Sri Nap Yorwerth would not want to be seen to be cultivating Reform or doing deals with Reform.
Not good for his brand. And the issue of independence, and it also, I mean, I'm a bit loath to say that word because Plaid Cymru aren't sort of going head first for independence. It's a sort of long-term ambition of theirs. And also, equally, I don't want to be, as a journalist who spends a lot of time in London, going, oh, the only reason Wales is interesting is because of independence. So I sort of want to put those little caveats out there. But then equally, Sri Nap Yorwerth, in his first call with Keir Starmer, talked about independence, and he's got a commission set up to look at it, hasn't he?
That's right, yes. So there was quite a big to-do about that first call with Keir Starmer and what got mentioned. And at first there was briefing. Some Welsh Labour MPs were tweeting about their feeling that it was inappropriate to bring up independence in that first call with the Prime Minister. A call, it's worth saying, that was delayed by some considerable time, possibly because of the shenanigans that were going on in Downing Street at the time. But Sri Nap Yorwerth confirmed that he had brought independence up. And whenever he gets asked about the issue, he always reframes the question and talks about having ambition for Wales. So, you know, whenever anyone is throwing it at him, he always says, you know, I make no secret of having ambition for Wales. However, I accept that this is something that has to happen according to the timetable that's decided by the voters. They are committed to this, spending £500,000 on this commission that would basically look at the case for independence and how Wales might get there. And the findings of that commission may well subsequently form a white paper with a view to that, although he has also said that he would not try to engineer a referendum in the life of this Senedd, which ends in 2029. But a lot of the opposition parties, including Reform, were very keen to point out that there is still a unionist majority in the Senedd if you look at the number of seats held and vote share as well. So, I think this is something that is going to continue to be a theme, and that a lot of the unionist parties do feel is a stick they can beat Plaid with. Certainly that's the way they seem to be behaving at the moment. Whether that's true or not, I'm not sure. It didn't work well for them during the Senedd election campaign, and they did try to use it quite a lot to raise that spectre of independence. I think that's not necessarily because the majority of the electorate wants independence. Certainly the polling doesn't suggest that, but people have seen what's happened in Scotland, right? You've had a nationalist government in power in Scotland for many, many years, and Scotland has not gone independent yet. So, I think people also, they just wanted to try someone else. And Plaid was the alternative party of the left. And certainly they benefited from a big sort of stop Reform message during the course of the campaign too.
Zanny, is the Economist interested in what's happening in Wales? Because I think you have sections. Well, of course you do, but I just think you have sections called like Asia and Latin America. You work on a big scale. Newspaper.
We're very interested in Wales, and I'm very interested in Wales. I was born 7 miles from the Welsh border, so I'm interested in this election, particularly because I'd love to ask you whether you think it was largely a sort of expression of frustration about Labour. And frankly, I'm generally of the view that change is generally good, and the Labour Party has dominated Welsh politics forever. I think that some shaking up is no bad thing. But was the election really about frustration with Labour? And then I guess sorry, I'm not taking your job here, but a second question.
Does The Economist have a podcast as well? Yes,
they do. My second question is about what the priorities are and should be, because I was struck. I mean, I think Wales has huge strengths. I really, apart from just being beautiful, but it is quite poor. And if you look at, despite spending quite a lot more on health than in England, health outcomes and waiting lists are 40% higher, I think, on average. I mean, it hasn't been that successful. And so I'm wondering how much part of the general discussion in Cardiff is what do we actually need to do in Wales?
Yes, so on that, Plaid was quite reluctant during the course of the election campaign, if we just take the health point first, to sort of give targets in terms of when it wanted to see waiting times reduced. We do now know that, the First Minister has said that he wants to see a return to pre-COVID waiting times by the end of the Senedd in 2029, and he wants to get the 2-year waits down a lot faster than that. Now, they are going to benefit, at least in the short term, from some of the measures that the outgoing government put in place to drive some of those waiting lists down. They have been falling, for quite a few months now. I want to say 8 or 9 months, but I'm not entirely sure of that. But that sort of time, really. And you would expect that to continue, in the same way that the Starmer government kind of benefited from falling immigration numbers because of measures that had previously been put in by Rishi Sunak and so on. So they've kind of got a little bit of a fair wind there. But I think the difficulty becomes how much money do you really want to chuck at health? Because health makes up half of the Welsh Government's budget. If it keeps putting money into health, it's going to become a glorified health board.
Well, especially with the ageing population, where that's going to go up anyway.
That's right. So, and, that is forecast to go up, as you know. Now, what the outgoing Labour government would say about the comparisons with England, and it's probably worth saying this just for fairness, is that because the population of Wales is older, sicker and poorer than England, you're not comparing like with like, because you would expect a country that has those demographics to have more demand on the NHS. They would argue that it's fairer to compare Wales with, say, the northeast of England than with England as a whole, because obviously the southeast tends to have a younger, richer population, so on and so forth. You can argue about all of that. The fact is that people are highly frustrated at the length of time they're having to wait